That CPD Show.
Welcome back to That CPD Show, and today my guest is Lauren Fox. Lauren is a lecturer and curriculum administrator at Missio Dei College. As part of the teaching team, Lauren lectures on leadership and Pentecostal theology modules and loves to encourage plenty of student engagement in her classes. I can vouch for that as a student of Lauren's myself. She's got a particular interest in power dynamics in Christian leadership, ensuring both healthy leadership and followership. Lauren also supports the guest lecturers that we welcome into the college and works with them to review and develop the teaching curriculum. Lauren, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here.
It's great to have you, and it's great to have someone also from the Missio Dei stock. Obviously, I'm a student myself of Missio Dei, so to have someone that's part of Missio Dei, it's great to have you part of it. How is Missio Dei going?
Yeah, really, really good. We've just got to the end of our next academic year. So a couple of weeks ago, we had graduation kind of dinner. They have their graduation ceremony in July, but we had a lovely dinner. Students are just about to go on their summer vacation, and I love the students. They make me really proud and emotional, but it's great to see them flourish. And I have to say, Chris, you're a very, very good student. Really loved having you in my class. So press on with all your studies.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I've really enjoyed it. It's been brilliant. I'm actually sad that it's going to end. So I've got a few months to go. So I've got to make sure I finish my dissertation, get it in on time.
Yes.
But I've loved it, and I would really recommend anyone that's thinking of doing a master's or an undergraduate degree just to consider Missio Dei, because I tell you what, the lectures were absolutely fantastic. Just the atmosphere is great as well. So yes, thorough endorsement there. I think that's
well. So I was a student at Missio Dei. I did my master's at Missio Dei, finished that in 2023, and I really felt that it was like a sacred endeavor. Yes, it was academic, but it was like a spiritual experience. So absolutely loved it.
Yeah, very much agree. Very, very much agree. Brilliant. Well, we are here to talk about resources and development. Today, this is That CPD Show after all, and we will get to development, but it is not just about development, because we also, as we all well know, we also talk about dessert, which is a very important thing. I always think dessert and development, they are just two things that go together rather well. So we are going to talk about dessert. Lauren, would you like to tell me what is your favourite dessert?
And now I told you before we press record that you will not have heard of the dessert that I've chosen. I stand by that. I hope I'm not going to be wrong. I'm gonna kind of give you two that I nearly chose, if that's allowed.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
So a baked chocolate cheesecake, nearly made it. Mary Berry does a very nice recipe. And also a creme brulee, very nearly made it. I remember the first time I ever had a creme brulee, it was like, what is this glory? But what I've gone for is very kind of school dinners sort of vibe.
Okay.
I've gone for what's called a chocolate bob cake.
Okay.
Have you heard of a chocolate bob cake?
You were absolutely correct. I have not heard of a chocolate bob cake.
Good.
What is a chocolate bob cake?
Imagine it looks like a cricket ball, kind of cricket ball shape and size.
Okay.
And it's crushed cornflakes. With melted chocolate and butter and syrup, kind of like a chocolate crispy cake. But the key is that the fact that the cornflakes are crushed and then rolled into a ball and set. Now, they may be just local to my area. When I was at school, they used to do them in the school canteen, just little mini ones. And I've recently found a cafe in my hometown that makes them. And yes, they are my dream dessert. I mean, cake, dessert, it's all the same, I guess.
Yes,
but yeah, not high class, but just delicious, chocolatey, gooey crunchiness.
Well, the good thing about the choice of dessert is it's a very individual choice, I always think, and it doesn't have to be from a Michelin star restaurant or anything like that. It can be what you like, and this just does sound very, very interesting, because it sounds a bit like a Rice Krispie cake but crushed.
I see you're a bit skeptical about this.
No,
kind of. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, because I love a Rice Krispie cake. I mean, who doesn't? I'm
in my 40s and I love like chocolate cornflake cake. Like, why not?
Yeah.
I have tried to replicate said dessert with some success, but it's not quite the same as the one I can buy in this cafe. I think you can find recipes online for like chocolate hedgehog cake or chocolate cracknel is maybe what it's called. But
Right. Okay.
yeah, in my local cafe, it's chocolate bob cake.
Okay. And so, so is this a local thing? What's your hometown?
It's Colville in Leicestershire. So it might be a local thing. I don't know who Bob is. Not sure. But maybe I should
Yeah.
find that out as a researcher. That should be my next
Maybe,
task.
maybe that's your next next research project. No,
Yeah.
but very good. And then what would you have that with? Is that you're gonna have it with a cup of tea? Are you gonna have it
Yeah.
with something else, or
Yeah.
how does it all work? Cup of tea.
100% a cup of tea.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it technically fills your criteria of being a dessert, but
Well,
I
I
would have it after food at some point. So
well I would say uh, dessert is in the eye of the beholder. I guess is probably the best way to describe
something like that.
it.
That is
And so
true.
one more question I've got to ask on this one: size. Are we talking like
Yeah.
cricket ball size? Could you
I
bowl
mean,
it
the ones,
almost?
yeah, I wouldn't eat it all in one go. It is
Right.
cricket ball size, but everything in moderation. So I would probably like have half and then wrap it up in the fridge, have half the next time. Definitely wouldn't share it.
Yeah, fair enough. When no one's asking you to share it, don't worry. It's all good. Okay, okay. I think that is a novel one, which I'm always a
Mm,
fan of a novel dessert. So that's
good.
a chocolate bob cake. Chocolate
Yes,
bob cake.
indeed.
Perfect. Brilliant. Oh, great addition to the podcast. That's fantastic. Chocolate bob cake. Make sure you find it. If you're in Colville, make sure you find one of those. And if you do like a chocolate bob cake, why don't you just let us know in the comments or something?
Yes,
Just
please.
give us your thoughts. Brilliant. Okay, we are going to go from dessert to three resources that you've got today, and we're going to go through them one by one. So,
Mhm.
Lauren, should we go through your first resource? What's the first one you brought with you today?
So I would say it's definitely the most impactful leadership book I've ever written. It's really short. It's only 81 pages. And it's called In the Name of Jesus, Reflections on Christian Leadership by Henri Nouwen. I'm resisting the urge to show it to you, but I can't. It's there.
There
It's
you
a
go.
little book like that. In the Name of Jesus by Henri Nouwen, Reflections on Christian Leadership. And I was actually gifted this book by my former youth worker. He, I think 3 years ago, just sent it to me in the post. I didn't know it was coming. And at that time in my leadership, I was experiencing quite a lot of challenge. And I remember going to read it in a coffee shop, and because it's only 81 pages, didn't take me very long. And I just wept like the whole time that I was reading this book. Um, and I hadn't really read anything before from Henri Nouwen. In case you don't know, he was a Dutch Roman Catholic priest, theologian. He was also a lecturer at Yale and Harvard. Um, it's not a really new book, um, but I think for me was definitely my most fundamental book on leadership that I've read. Um, and I can talk you through that in more detail,
Yes, go for it.
if that
Yes,
would be helpful.
absolutely.
So three kind of main themes that he draws out. That the context of the book is that he was asked to present a paper at a conference, I think it was in Toronto, on his reflections on the future of Christian leadership in the 21st century. So this was written in 1989, so still like 11 years before the 21st century. And he summed up his reflections in three different areas. He said that Christian leaders of the 21st century are going to face three temptations. He said that leaders are going to face the temptation to be relevant, the temptation to be spectacular, and the temptation to be powerful. Temptation to be relevant. And it struck me because I think that's something I struggle with, and I think maybe we struggle with in the world as Christians and leaders today. I remember once I was a youth worker for quite a long time. A young person said to me, "Lauren, just don't try and be cool. Just be yourself." And that really got me to the heart because she was totally right. But now unpacks the fact that we're not called to be relevant. We're called to be irrelevant. We're called to not become so well adjusted to our culture. Um, And he talks about the fact that intimacy with Jesus is the most important thing. And I'll just read a little quote from this is page 24. I mean, the pages are so like short, there's hardly much in there. But he says this, the question is not how many people take you seriously, how much are you going to accomplish? Can you show some results? But are you in love with Jesus? So that whole idea of relevance, of yeah, making progress, showing that I'm achieving something, actually for Christian leaders in the 21st century, at the heart of it is, do we love Jesus? And I think every day in my leadership, I'm part of a leadership team in my AOG church in Leicester. I don't want to be relevant. I want to love Jesus, and that's hard. So that was the first one. Second one, temptation to be spectacular. And we all know that, don't we? We feel that we've got to prove our worth as leaders. And he talks about this kind of the desire for stardom that can afflict many leaders, and that sort of temptation to feel like the hero. And again, I'll read you another little quote. I hope it's okay that I'm reading
Go
quotes.
for it. Absolutely.
He says this is on page 39. He says most of us still feel that ideally we should be able to do it all and do it successfully. Stardom and individual heroism, which are such obvious aspects of our competitive society, are not at all alien to the church. There too, the dominant image is that of the self-made man or woman who can do it alone. And he really challenges leaders, like if you can do it alone, then are you really doing it in God's strength? And the antidote to the temptation to be spectacular is to be authentic and vulnerable, and to enter into that idea of confession, but confession with those that we lead, and kind of living a life that's open to all. So temptation to be relevant, temptation to be spectacular, and then the final one, temptation to be powerful. And when I talk about my second resource, I'll talk about this in a bit more detail. But yeah, we all have, I guess, a lot of leaders have that tussle with power. What is power? How we outwork the power or authority that the roles of leadership have. And I'll just read you one of the quote. This is from page 60. Nouwen writes, he talks about the long, painful history of the church is a history of a people who are tempted to choose power over love, control over the cross, being a leader over being led. And he talks about how Jesus' example of power was that of downward mobility, which ended in the cross. And we're often striving for that sort of upward mobility. And the antidote for that, he says that we need to seek a leadership of powerlessness and humility. So it's a punchy book. It's really short. You can read it in an hour. So if you want to tick off some CPD really quick, but actually you need to read it again, because even though it's written well, nearly 30 odd years ago, I think it's so relevant and challenging for today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to pick up on that point of relevance, because I think that's something. I mean, we're a modern, movement of churches, of course, and we have modern styles of worship and preaching and all those kind of things. So I think for many that call from Henri Nouwen there can be a difficult one to wrestle with, isn't it? Because it's wrestling with, I thought we're supposed to be relevant, and yet there's this call to be not relevant. Talk to me about how that's maybe worked out in your own life. You talked a little bit about that kind of needing to kind of be more about are you in love with Jesus, rather than being relevant? Because I wonder, has the church kind of got into a bit of a not necessarily that relevance is completely wrong. There's but is there some things that we've missed by focusing too much on relevance? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it's about priorities, and I think about my own. So I worked for 14 years as a youth leader, and thinking about how much of my energy I put into developing programs, and also like maybe my own way of communicating with young people. What was my primary goal? Was it to get their attention and for them to like me and for them to come to our activities, or was my primary motivation and focus on communicating and embodying the reality of the love of Jesus. And think about, when I've had young people in my living room crammed in there, was I trying to entertain them with fun stuff, or was I trying to communicate, like, this is what following Jesus means for me? So I think, like, relevance in itself isn't bad. We need to communicate the gospel in a way that people will understand. Um, and I wonder, how much of, like, the quiet revival we've got going on about kind of Gen Z and, younger people being interested in church, and I see that. But we can't lose what's the heart of it? The heart of it is relationship with Jesus. The heart of it is people coming to know Jesus rather than just having all of the stuff. And I didn't mention it in my summary, but the antidote to that relevance, Nouwen argued, was the discipline of silence and contemplation. And the whole sort of area of theological reflection, which is that discipline of us kind of sifting through what is my practice, what's happening, what am I doing, why am I doing this, what ought to I be doing, and how do I change my kind of practice as a result of that. And Nouwen argues that we get to that place in silence and contemplation when all the relevant noise is going on, like we get to the heart of what you're calling me to do, Jesus. What's my relationship like with you in that space of silence?
Absolutely. And I think that, so I heard or no, read actually. It was a post, an Instagram post by Kerry Newhoff, if you knew Kerry Newhoff. He kind of he's like me but better. So has a podcast, but all this. And Kerry talked about it just came out, I think today or yesterday, the church has changed from needing to be attractional to actually having a sense of depth to it. Because the attractional church of what happened, the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, all those things, whilst it had its benefits, it's now not reaching people as it once did, and actually what people are now looking for, especially because of online and things like that, they're looking for a real sense of depth. Now I think that's a depth of community as well as a depth of theology, but I think people are now engaging in long form conversations now, so they can go and watch a 3-hour conversation or something, and they go into all sorts of depth. There's there are people like is it Wes Huff, who's an apologist, a Christian apologist, and he's been very, very popular online recently, but talking in great depth with people who aren't even Christians about the Bible and theology and all things like that, because people really they've had enough of the kind of the surface level. They really want to get into the depth. And I think it's this thing that actually the stripping away that kind of thing of going, actually, how do we attract people to actually, how do we honor Jesus in what we do in our ministry? I think that, and interestingly, it all comes back around that actually it has the approach by putting down our relevance, we become even more relevant than we've ever probably been before. And so it's that encouragement to lay down what we think is it, like you said, we're not trying to entertain, for youth pastors watching this, we're not trying to entertain the young people, we're trying to lead them into a relationship with Jesus. So fantastic.
Interesting. Great.
Brilliant. Well, let's go on to your second resource. That was a great one, that one. I need to make sure I read that one. Let's go on to your second resource. What's the second one you brought with you?
The second one might be a little bit more well known. It is quite recent. It was written in 2020, and it's possibly one of the first books that really started a kind of wave of books around what power, abuse of power, narcissism looks like in the church today. And it is called A Church Called Tove. Is it? It's called A Church Called Tove, Forming a Goodness Culture that Resists Abuses of Power and Promotes Healing. And it's written by New Testament scholar Scot McKnight and his daughter Laura Barringer. And I know you know a little bit about this book, Chris, but just for everybody else who's listening, Laura Barringer was a member of Willow Creek Church in the States, and was kind of witness to and kind of all the fallout really that happened with Bill Hybels and his kind of leadership fall or failure, whatever you want to call it. And they were just sitting, I think, talking about, oh, this isn't right, somebody needs to do something about this. And then they just were like, oh, well, we should write a book about it. I think Laura Barringer is a primary school teacher, so not necessarily a kind of experienced scholar in this area, but it's a brilliant book, and it really was a catalyst for me and my kind of further study, and I'll touch on that in a few moments. But yeah, foundational book around the area of abuse of power, toxic leadership, all of that sort of thing in the church today. So yeah, I can go into more detail, but I don't know if you want to make a comment initially. Sorry,
Yeah,
that's terrible.
absolutely. I mean, it's a book I've read firstly
Yes.
and found it very interesting. And obviously, it's in the wake, like you said, of the Bill Hybels scandal and things that went on
Yeah.
there. And I know, and in the book, the author, so Laura Barringer, picks up on the fact that she knew people that had come forward
Yeah.
and things like that. And obviously, it talks to things that it can feel very uncomfortable for us because it's as leaders in the church,
Yeah.
it's the kind of, we always hate to hear of those kind of stories because they're so sad, and that we have the people affected. We always want to make sure that our thoughts are with those, but also makes us think about our leadership, about what are we doing that could possibly be not having that kind of goodness culture. I dive into that goodness culture that McKnight and Barringer talk about, because they kind of really dive into more than just here's what you should do, but it's very much into let's have a look at what the Bible talks about goodness, and that word tov even is that a Hebrew word, isn't it? So
it's the Hebrew word for good, or for goodness, and it's from Genesis 1, and they in kind of page 8 they unpack it in a lot more detail, and they say things like light. So thinking about that Genesis account, light is tov, the land and sea are tov, plants are tov, day and night are tov, sea animals and birds are tov, land animals are tov. And then God saw everything that he'd made, and it was very tov. So it's that idea, of goodness, and that apparently there are more than 700 appearances of that word tov in scriptures, and they say, McKnight and Barringer say, that to be tov is to be like Jesus, and we are made to be people who produce fruit, who produce this goodness. It's a variety of the fruit of the Spirit. So it's, as a church, we should be tov. As leaders, we should be tov. However, as I mean, it's hard as a leader to have not kind of seen any or heard any discussion on kind of some of the state of moral leadership at the moment. But that there are lots of examples of leadership that isn't tov, that is using the possibly controversial word toxic. And it's interesting that's why I got into this book. So I did, as I said at the intro, I did my master's in practical theology at Missio Dei. I did it in a year, so full time, just bashed it out in a year. And I wrote my master's dissertation on the area of leadership failure, power abuse, and I asked the question as to whether an overemphasis on contemporary charisma is contributing to toxic Christian leadership. So I explored that idea of this notion of contemporary charisma, and I kind of compared that with New Testament understanding of charisma, and kind of drew out some themes. But that's like wider research that first got me into this book, and then their follow-up book, which is called Pivot. But I love what they write. They kind of unpack throughout the books what they say is 7 elements of a tov culture, and this ends up in what they kind of say is their circle of tov, and perhaps you can put a link to that in the show notes. But the circle of tov has 7 elements. So firstly is the importance of, as leaders, to have compassion and empathy. And it's really interesting that in another book, so Chuck de Groot, a kind of seminal work really on narcissism in leadership, which is called When Narcissism Comes to Church. He unpacks characteristics of a narcissistic pastor, and one of the key ones is a lack of empathy. So as leaders, like the importance of empathy and compassion. So that's the first element of that circle of tov. Secondly is the need for grace. and graciousness in everybody that we deal with. Actually, one of the things I love about de Groot's work is that when he's talking about narcissistic pastors, the first thing he is like, we're going to be gracious to everybody here. We're not, we understand that people who have traits of narcissism have often have an immense amount of shame because of things that they've experienced. So I love again how these two kind of books weave into each other. So empathy and compassion, firstly, the need for grace and graciousness. Their third point is putting people first. Absolutely love that. That is like the heart of the sort of leader that I want to be. Yes, I know programs are really important and finance and structures, but at the heart of the call to leadership is the call to put people first. And then the final four is they talk about the importance of truth telling, and they weave then into a whole section on the kind of proliferation of non-disclosure agreements in churches, and what does that mean for truth? And then they talk about justice is the fifth one, and the importance of service. And there's the whole kind of thing there around servant-hearted leadership, which I don't know if Mark Button's spoken about that, but that's one of his topics. And the final one is Christ-likeness, and I think that sums that up in terms of also kind of the things that Henri Nouwen talking about, that we're pursuing Jesus, we're pursuing likeness to Jesus in every element of our leadership. So yeah, have a look at that circle of Tove. I think it's super, super helpful. The second book, Pivot, that gets a lot more practical. So yeah, I think so. A Church Called Tove is more of the kind of principles, and then Pivot, the second book, goes into the practicalities. So yeah, I've talked a lot. I'm gonna let you jump in.
Great. No, absolutely fantastic. There's, so much to dive into on that. But I'd love to dive into some of your master's thesis, because I think thinking about charisma, I think in church, and I think this, Church Called Tove really does tie in with this very much so. And I think I wonder if you could sort of contrast maybe the difference between a worldly charisma. I know that sort of would look into someone like Max Weber would be someone that would come up in that. Comparing that to kind of a more Christ-like, would charisma be the right term? I mean, charisma is a very New Testament word. But maybe they've got a sort of difference in meaning. So talk to me about the difference between a kind of that kind of more worldly charisma compared with what I think Jesus is supposed to be talking about.
Sure. So actually in my dissertation, I looked at three sorts of charisma. So contemporary charisma, which I explained as like that personal magnetism, somebody who's got like the sparkly personality, like I've even found myself thinking it or doing it when you're like, that politician or somebody, they've just got no charisma. Like, it's just something that feels innate in our language, and it means that they're probably not a very like charismatic, again the word, sparkly communicator, somebody who like dominates a room with their presence. Apparently like JFK, he was like one of the first to really kind of be thought of as somebody with charisma in terms of the modern age. So that's the sort of thing that I would kind of explain, where I'd explain contemporary charisma. The second sort of charisma is by Max Weber, which you name dropped. Very impressed. Charismatic authority. Max Weber was a sociologist around the start of the 20th century. I'm getting my centuries wrong. Early 1900s, and he unpacks the idea that people follow a leader because they are inspiring, and they almost develop like this godlike sort of status. And really, it's the people who attribute charisma to the leader. And it's all kind of new and innovative, and a certain amount of time later, that charisma will routinize. And then the people will seek like another inspirational person to lead them. So, for example, there's the argument that whether Hitler was he like a leader with Weberian charisma. And then we've got, kind of taking it further back, we've got, in my dissertation, I called it Pauline charisma. I think there's maybe some problems with that. So I think I've reverted, kind of changed that to like a New Testament charisma. So with that sort of charisma, we're thinking about the gift of God's grace, and charisma in that way being gifted, and tied in deeply with the Spirit of God. Uh, New Testament charisma being about spiritual gifts, but also significantly being about the fruit of the Spirit. So for me, a New Testament charisma is a leader who leads with humility, who leads with, and this is, I focus quite a lot in the final part of my dissertation on this, a leader who leads with gentleness. So we contrast that to a leader with contemporary charisma and, dynamic, sparkly personality, owns a room, and then a leader with um, New Testament charisma, humility, gentleness, and often we confuse gentleness as weakness. But I'm advocating for that the church, we need to reclaim this New Testament charisma that isn't focused on a charisma that is about the hero-centered leader, or a leader who maybe has those attributes of narcissism, or kind of appears one way on the platform but has a different sort of demeanor off the platform. As a church, and maybe as a Pentecostal church, maybe as Assemblies of God, the church worldwide, we need to reclaim this New Testament charisma that's focused on leading for the common good, that's focused on a reliance on the gift of the Spirit, knowing that we don't do any of it in our own power, and a real focus on character-driven leadership. So yeah, in kind of summary of my 120 odd pages of my dissertation, that's it there.
Brilliant, brilliant. I mean, fantastic, and I think really important. And when it comes to, I think Church called Tove really does speak into that very much so. And I think, it's the one area that Jesus talks about in terms of, he gives a specific command on how leadership should
Yeah.
look like, and it's not that kind of the sparkly personality.
Yeah.
In
Not
fact,
so with you.
not so with you. In fact,
Yeah.
he contrasts it with,
Yeah.
Roman rule and
Yeah.
lording it over, and that could be
Sure.
a form of, kind of modern charisma, Weberian charisma, but
Yeah.
definitely this not New Testament charisma. And I think
Mm.
you're right. And I think even as Pentecostals ourselves, I think, we are in what, not indebted, but we are intrinsically linked to the moment of Pentecost. That
Yeah.
as Pentecost, and that means that the work of the Holy Spirit, that
Yeah.
means that the gifts of the Holy Spirit, also the fruit of the Holy Spirit, are
Mm.
central to
Yeah.
what we believe, how we think, and all those things. So
Mm.
actually, that leadership, then thinking about it as the fruit of the Spirit coming
Mm.
through in our leadership is vital
Yeah.
as Pentecostals for us. So I think it's a really important. Well, I mean,
Mm.
I'd encourage that if anyone can read your dissertation, it's definitely worth reading. I think I've actually read yours. I was
Quite
sent it,
possibly.
and it was an
Yeah.
excellent read. And a
Yeah.
church called Tove, I think, that dives into
Yeah.
that as well. So
Absolutely. And one of the things I love doing at Missio Dei, so I developed a series of lectures based on my dissertation as part of a few modules that we run. So to be able to in everything that we deliver, and you'll attest to this at Missio Dei, is that we present ideas, and then there's plenty of space for discussion and people to evaluate that. And I'm happy for people in the classroom to not agree with the sort of things that I bring, but to see younger leaders just chew over some of these things, for me, like, that brings me immense joy. And yeah, there is much hope in the future of leadership within the Pentecostal movement, for sure.
fantastic. Okay, that's a church called Tove, and also
Mm.
Pivot as well, by Scot McKnight
Yes,
and Laura Barringer. Should we go on to
it's
your
yellow. It's very nice.
very yellow? It's a lovely, lovely cover, actually. Yeah,
It
very
is, yeah.
nice. Should we go on to your final resource?
Final one. Um, so I wanted to bring it kind of to the present, with I guess the most recent book that I've read. And the book that I've chosen, it's the one that's formed part of my devotional reading for the last probably 2 or 3 months. And it really spoke to me as a woman in leadership. It equipped me, it challenged me, it comforted me, and it was gifted to me by the wonderful Lily Brightwell, principal of Missio Dei. So yeah, I thought I would bring this one. So it is Lead Like the Real You by Amy Orr-Ewing. There it is. And it takes the form of a selection of letters. I should have noted how many there are actually. There are 43 letters from Amy to a younger woman in leadership. And it's basically Amy passing on wisdom to a younger leader. And in the intro, Amy writes that leadership can be a painful and lonely road. And she says to all of us reading that I pray that as you read each letter that follows, you will know that many women are rooting for you. And it just made me think about that Hebrews 12, like cloud of witnesses. So as I've kind of read this and chewed over this for the past couple of months, I've just felt like a sense of kind of the Hebrews 12 witnesses are cheering me on, going, yes, you can do this. I believe in you. So yeah, some of the titles of the letters include When You Can't Pray, Holding On to Faithful Friends. There's a letter about that. Learning when to say yes or no. So some of them are really practical, but also really applicable for men and women. But I think where the book really flies is where it speaks into issues that only women leaders get. And three or four that I just wanted to pull out for this is, so letter 3 talks about how women have to work harder to be heard in meetings because of the tone of their voice. Interestingly, I kind of heard something similar about like football commentators. Some people struggle with like listening to female football commentators just because of the tone of their voice, and like the feminist in me then is like but yeah, there's a whole thing there around tone of voice. So as women in leadership meetings, we have to work harder to be heard from that issue. So there's a letter about that. Also in that letter, she talks about how as women we have to possibly think harder than men about what to wear when we're preaching. I mean, you probably just like throw on a t-shirt and jeans and a little bomber jacket. But
well,
for
I do try, I will say.
But yeah, I think it's like, oh, are people going to judge me for that? Am I wearing something that's too revealing, or is it too frumpy, or do I need heels on? But can I walk in those? Am I going to trip up the steps? So, you know, there's all those things. So that's letter 3. She talks about that. Letter 4, she talks about how as women we balance appearing too pushy and kind of balancing that with them being too self-deprecating, because men just generally, I'm making generalizations, so feel free to kind of, you know, push back, but men often just kind of, they don't hold back, they don't second guess, they just maybe give a viewpoint in a meeting. But as a woman, and maybe other women that I've spoken to, we often second guess, are people going to listen to me? I need to kind of couch my phrase in, you know, not offending people. So that letter speaks into that. And letter 7 talks about parenting guilt, a bit of the mom guilt, kind of balancing working for employment, working in the home. And she really reiterates the fact that motherhood is a valuable work. So I loved that. But then I was drawn to this book, and I was gifted this book because it speaks into some of my own experiences as well. And there's a whole section on kind of detailing abuse and injustice within leadership settings. And for me, these just like deeply spoke to me around some kind of theological truth, some practical application, kind of helping me bring some of my stuff again to the Lord. But yeah, I just love the fact that, you know, I've never met Amy, but I felt like reading this that I have a cheerleader, and actually wider, I have a whole bunch of cheerleaders as a woman in leadership. So yeah, I love it.
There's something about that format of the older leader writing to the younger leader.
Mm-hmm.
I read a similar book. It was Eugene Peterson's books to letters to his son. I think it's called the Timothy letters. Really similar format.
Yeah.
But I think what's great about this is this has got a real female's perspective. And so talk to me a little bit about that, because I think you're right, because you know these are things I don't think about when I go into meetings. I don't think about how I'm going to say something or how it's going to come across. No, look, that doesn't say that I'm not careful with my words and things like that. But I wonder whether, you know, whether for those who are listening, who are maybe like myself, men, that how we can learn and to be more appreciative and to be more empathetic to the different needs and the different experiences. So maybe, like massive topic there. So let's just dive into maybe what are some things that you've seen that you think, oh yeah, there would be some really good things I think that male leaders could learn in a church setting that would just really help us, help the female leaders.
Okay. So interesting. My head's going immediately to like practical things. So again, I understand that I am making generalizations, and I understand that there are many men, and my husband is brilliant. He's out with my son right now, taking him to his dentist appointment. So there are many, many men who take those kind of caregiving responsibilities, but often there are women in leadership. We have those plates to juggle. So sometimes when there's an expectation, or if a meeting is put on in an evening, or a meeting is put on 8:30 in the morning for a woman, or an event is put on for a woman who does have to do the school run, I think there's a first step would be thinking about practicalities of, if you have a woman in leadership in your church setting, what are the practicalities of that person's life? And for me, for example, like summer holidays are tough, because when you have your child, and again, this happens for men, but often it can be the woman who is doing the thinking of like, okay, I need to work these many days, I need to have these many days off. I used to like my old job, I used to take unpaid leave in the school holidays just to try and like cover some of the time. So I think, yeah, firstly, there's a recognition of practicalities. I'm sure, like when this podcast's done, I'm going to think of many things I could have said. So maybe this is a follow-up. And actually, I'm thinking of maybe doing a PhD in this sort of area around experiences of women within Pentecostalism. But you heard that here first. That's like,
hey, I'm happy with well, yes, I love an exclusive on the podcast.
Exclusive. So that's great. Haven't even spoken to Lily about that yet. But yeah. So I think secondly, I would talk about language. And all too often there can be lazy jokes around. So yeah, I've had people commenting on what I'm wearing, or again, some women are okay with that, but I think about, would that happen with a man? Maybe not necessarily. So I think there's a thing around considering language, and many other things which I can't think of right now.
No, that's fine. I think that's really helpful. I think just sometimes getting into, I think for all leaders, male, female, to get into the world of the other is super important. I think, and it's a core line, isn't it? When I think of Ephesians chapter 5, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
Yeah,
it means that for me to properly do that, I've got to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how Brene Brown, she defines empathy as feeling with somebody. So there's a video that I've seen online, and Brene she does a voiceover, and there's like a big pit, and like an animal stuck in the bottom of the pit, and sympathy is like leaning over the side of the pit, going, "Oh, there, you'll be okay. I'll send you some food down." But empathy is literally like crawling into the pit with the animal. So yeah, feeling with somebody. So yeah, I guess I would encourage, like, how can you do your best? I know empathy doesn't always come naturally to people. Some people are more gifted with empathy than others, but how can you try and feel with that woman leader? What is the context? What might power dynamics, male patriarchal kind of male female power dynamics look like for that woman in that context? And it's almost like kind of, you press pause and you just do like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna think about everything that's going on here, and then maybe rethink what you were going to say or do.
Yeah, fantastic. No, that's brilliant. So that is Lead Like the Real You by Amy Orr-Ewing. Lauren, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really enjoyed that conversation, and like four excellent resources.
You got a bonus one in there, yeah.
Exactly. So what you could do is you could take the cake, I can't remember the name of it now, and you
chocolate bob cake,
and you could cut it in quarters. So you have a kind of a quarter of the sphere each, and then you can enjoy it whilst you read the books. So I think that's the great. Or maybe you just got to need to have 4 bob cakes whilst you enjoy 4 books. So.
Oh, I have tried once cutting them in half and trying to fashion them into smaller. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Okay. Don't fashion them into small. No, okay. Just go for it as they are. Brilliant. Lauren, thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed it. And I'm sure I'd love to pick up on, there's some brilliant topics that would be great to pick up with you again. So I'm sure we'll get you on the podcast to talk more about some of these topics. So, but for today, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of That CPD Show. For more episodes, why not subscribe and give us a review? It really helps us out. See you next time.